The film begins on the streets of Paris, where a man climbs out of a sewer in the middle of the night and starts looking for a taxi. He runs toward an empty car, unaware that his movements have attracted the attention of something else lurking underground. The taxi driver tries to help him when he falls in the middle of the road, but he backs away after seeing something drag the man beneath the ground. After this incident, we meet three Americans, Andy, Brad, and Chris, who are traveling through Europe. The three of them love adventure and keep score for every crazy challenge they complete. When a French woman walks past them, Chris challenges Andy to get her phone number, but Andy replies that she is not his type. The other two burst out laughing and tease him for never having tried to flirt with any girl before. Trying to change the subject, Andy tells them that he is about to attempt a challenge so daring that they will be jealous of him. In Paris, they head straight to the top of the Eiffel Tower, where Andy begins doing some calculations in a small notebook. He then pulls a long rope out of his bag, making his friends nervous. Brad even apologizes for the jokes they made about him on the train and tells Andy that he has nothing to prove to them. A little later, they hear someone approaching the restricted area, so they quickly hide. A beautiful young woman appears, holding a folded piece of paper against her chest as tears stream down her face. She is preparing to jump. Andy comes out of hiding and tries to convince her to change her mind, but the young woman continues toward the edge. Andy throws himself after her, relying on the rope he has tied around his leg. His friends quickly grab the other end of the rope, and Andy eventually manages to grab the woman's leg. However, the only thing he gets out of the situation is her shoe. Fortunately, they are already close enough to the ground that the woman is not injured. Andy, on the other hand, hits his head against the metal bar on the way back up and wakes up in a hospital the next day. Brad has kept the mysterious woman's shoe, while Andy asks his friends to help him find the piece of paper and discover who she is. This leads to several misunderstandings with the French, who become angry at the tourists' behavior. The only exception is one woman who mistakes them for beggars and throws a coin at them. At the hospital, Andy can't believe his eyes when he sees the woman walking down the hallway wearing a nurse's uniform. He runs after her, and even manages to make her smile when he tells her that he wants to return her shoe. But at that exact moment, an unfortunate doctor suddenly opens the door without noticing Andy and slams it into the already injured young man, knocking him down again. The woman escapes once more. The doctor also asks about her, and says that she has stolen his heart. Without realizing that the doctor is speaking literally about something else, Andy tells him that he knows the feeling well. Shortly afterward, his friends arrive with good news. They have found a piece of paper and discovered that the girl's name is Seraphine Bigot. Once Andy recovers and gathers enough courage, he goes to her house and rings the doorbell. When she opens the door, she is still wearing the nurse costume. Andy notices that her fingers are stained with blood. She takes the shoe from him, quickly thanks him, then slams the door in his face and tells him that they should not stay there for long. Chris and Brad have already left, but Andy becomes afraid that Seraphine might try to hurt herself again, so he starts ringing the doorbell like crazy. Seraphine opens the door and begs him to leave. She eventually agrees to meet him again the next day. When the agreed-upon time arrives, Seraphine shows up in a hurry while the guys are still fixing their appearance and giving each other some last-minute advice. They then go to a cafe, but everything starts falling apart because Andy is acting like a complete idiot, and Seraphine suspects that he expects far too much from her during the date. When she finally gets tired of him, Andy opens his heart and admits that he is nervous because he really likes her. He also tells her that he is worried about her safety and can't stop thinking about her sad eyes. His words seem to affect her, and she admits that she was deeply moved by his courage when he jumped to save her without thinking twice. However, she suddenly starts speaking in a mysterious tone and says that no one can really help her. At that moment, another customer at the cafe begins provoking Andy and showing off in front of his friends, who are hiding at another table. Seraphine tells the bully to stop, but the man headbutts Andy, forcing her to return the favor and save him. She pushes the man with a force no one expects, sending him flying into the other side of the room. When Seraphine realizes that she has revealed more of her secret than she intended, she becomes nervous and rushes out of the cafe. Andy follows her, and can't hide how attracted he is to her. The two almost kiss, but she changes her mind at the last moment and tells him to stop looking for her, assuring him that she is doing it for his own good. Andy feels like his heart has been broken, but his friends tell him that she is only playing games to make him become attached to her. Andy isn't completely convinced, though, and remains worried about her mental state, especially after Seraphine reveals that she is an orphan and blames herself for the deaths of her parents. The three friends then decide to visit her house again. This time, a man named Claude opens the door and tells them that Seraphine isn't home. He claims to like Americans and invites the three of them inside. Andy refuses the invitation and asks about Claude's relationship with the girl. Claude simply replies that he is taking care of her. He then gives them a flyer for a party at a club called Dalen and tells them that Seraphine will be there. Andy can't resist the temptation and drags his friends to the nightclub. A little later, the club's bouncer appears to let almost anyone inside, but he stops them when he notices that they are Americans. He refuses to let them enter until Andy tells him that they were invited by Claude. Inside, the atmosphere is extremely strange. There are hardly any women there, and Sarah Finn is nowhere to be seen. Chris volunteers to go back to her house while Andy waits there with Brad. No one answers when Chris knocks on the door, but he notices a light coming from another part of the house, so he decides to investigate. To his shock, Chris discovers Sarah Finn locked inside a cage. He immediately breaks a window so he can enter the basement and rescue her. Even though she is trapped, she keeps telling him that she doesn't need his help and tries to make him leave. But when he mentions that Andy is at the party, she changes her mind. When she sees the flyer Claude gave him, Sarah Finn asks Chris to get the key to the cage hanging on the wall. She tells him that Andy is in serious danger, so Chris refuses to leave her. When she tells him to stay out of it, she realizes that she won't be able to convince him and decides to knock him unconscious so he won't interfere. A few minutes later, Chris wakes up and finds himself locked inside the cage. The key has been returned to its place on the wall, far beyond his reach. The basement appears to be empty, but behind a curtain in a hidden area, he can hear the sounds of medical equipment. Chris starts shouting and calling for someone to help him get out, but no one answers. Meanwhile, Sarah Finn arrives at the club. The bouncer appears to be somewhat afraid of her and lets her in immediately, even without Claude's permission. Inside, Sarah Finn grabs Andy and warns him that they have to leave the place as quickly as possible. A man named Jack tries to block their path, but Sarah Finn tells him that Andy belongs to her. She then takes Andy through a passageway that looks like a tunnel. Claude later reprimands Jack for making that mistake. Then he follows the two of them, unaware that Brad is right behind him. Meanwhile, inside the cage, Chris puts his mind to work and comes up with a way to escape. He turns his clothes into an improvised tool that helps him reach the key, then manages to knock it down using his shoe. As Chris starts pulling himself out, Sarah Finn and Andy continue escaping from Claude until they reach a wall with a terrifying-looking opening. Andy has to go through it alone. Before they part ways, Claude takes the opportunity to steal a kiss from her. Andy then feels her claws on his back and notices that they look more like animal claws than human fingernails. As Sarah Finn becomes more agitated, she pushes him into the opening and screams at him to disappear as quickly as possible. But Andy still believes that Claude is the biggest threat, so he hesitates to leave her alone. Even when her voice begins to change, he refuses to change his mind, until Sarah Finn finally loses her patience and starts throwing rocks and bricks at him, forcing him to move away. Meanwhile, Claude's men also appear to be undergoing a strange transformation that makes them look more like animals. But when the light of the full moon shines on Sarah Finn's face, the truth is revealed: she and all of her friends are werewolves. After transforming, Sarah Finn enters through the same opening, but Brad doesn't see her. He arrives moments later, still searching for Andy. Meanwhile, the other werewolves begin spreading terror throughout the club, which is now filled with victims. When the three Americans realize they've fallen into a trap, they run toward the exit, only to discover that the security guard has already locked it from the outside and even removed the fake sign. After Chris manages to free himself, he hears painful moaning coming from the other side of the basement, so he goes to see if someone needs help. When he pulls back the curtain, he finds a terrifying werewolf with no legs lying on a hospital stretcher. Chris tries to drive the creature away, but it's incredibly strong. It manages to drag the stretcher and all the medical equipment along with it as it moves toward Chris. The young man uses a spoon to open the nearest door, only to find himself standing in front of a closet. But the monster is now extremely close, so Chris manages to jump over the overturned stretcher and escape through the window. Brad, meanwhile, encounters another terrifying situation in the sewers when he notices two glowing spots that catch his attention. He doesn't realize they're the eyes of a werewolf until it's too late. Brad doesn't survive the attack, and the rushing water carries his body away. At the same time, Andy is still in the sewers when he suddenly finds himself face to face with the creature. Terrified, he runs in the opposite direction and reaches a gate just in time to close it. But the monster is incredibly strong and easily tears the entire gate apart. Andy has no choice but to buy himself some time by using a discarded metal rod as a weapon. Even so, the creature quickly regains its strength and bites Andy's leg as he tries to escape. The next morning, Andy wakes up at Sarah Finn's house with his senses incredibly heightened. Chris is also there, hiding in the garden and watching through the window. At that moment, Andy sees Sarah Finn putting what appear to be human organs into a blender. Chris throws a small rock at the window, catching Andy's attention, and starts warning his friend. But Sarah Finn interrupts them when she enters the room carrying a drink. She explains to Andy that he was bitten by a werewolf, which means he will eventually turn into one himself. Andy laughs, thinking it's all just a joke, until he actually begins experiencing horrifying hallucinations. Seraphine explains that these symptoms are normal during the transformation. Things become even more disturbing when her mother appears, only for Andy to discover that she is actually a corpse. Terrified, he escapes through the window without realizing how much his physical abilities have improved. He also fails to hear his friend calling out to him. Meanwhile, Claude manages to capture Chris. Andy then returns to the club, which is now filled with police officers and scattered body parts belonging to the victims. He is horrified when he recognizes Brad as the police pull his body out of the river. At that moment, Andy meets Inspector Locke, who discovers that all the bodies are missing their hearts. But no one believes Andy's testimony. Now Andy has to deal with the changes happening to his body, including his growing appetite. One of his new instincts is an intense attraction to women, and that instinct awakens when he meets Amy Finch, another American tourist. She agrees to go out to dinner with him, but she finds his strange behavior at the table suspicious. Andy remains in denial, even when Brad's ghost suddenly appears and scares him. His reaction causes an extremely embarrassing scene, while he remains unaware that a detective has been watching him closely. Andy runs to the bathroom and starts talking to the dead, while Brad repeats Seraphine's explanations. He also tells Andy that he has become a zombie himself, doomed to wander the earth until the werewolf who killed him dies. But the most important thing now is for Andy to stay away from Amy and lock himself away before the moon appears in the sky. However, Andy stubbornly ignores all the warnings and takes Amy for a walk through the cemetery. The atmosphere between them begins to heat up, while the detective continues following Andy, sneaking behind the gravestones with his little dog. Suddenly, Andy feels the effects of the moon taking over. He leaves Amy on top of a grave and runs toward a fountain, throwing himself into the water to cool his body down. Amy becomes annoyed and starts looking for him. At that exact moment, Andy emerges from the water in his werewolf form, ready to attack her. Amy immediately runs through the cemetery and tries to keep him away with perfume before hiding inside a locked tomb. But she mistakes his shadow for the shadow of the little dog, and eventually leaves her hiding place at the worst possible moment. Andy attacks her and then devours the detective as well. Even the little dog doesn't survive. When Andy finally regains consciousness in the middle of the chaos, he finds himself surrounded by the flashes of reporters' cameras. Inspector Locke arrests Andy and reveals that he had hired the detective to keep an eye on him. He then shows Andy what the victims from the previous night now look like. When Andy is left alone in the morgue, Amy suddenly opens her eyes and begins cursing him. Brad also appears, and the two of them start arguing. Meanwhile, the female prosecutor mocks Locke's supposedly crazy theories and orders the American's immediate arrest. But Andy has already managed to escape. When the inspector returns, he finds Brad and Amy out on the street and finally accepts that everything is real. Brad tells Andy that the only way he can become human again is by eating the heart of the werewolf who turned him. And Andy knows that the werewolf in question is most likely Seraphine. At that exact moment, Claude's gang suddenly appears out of nowhere and drags Andy to an old church. As they make their way down into the underground chambers, Claude explains that his clan is made up of carefully selected werewolves who were chosen to create a superior bloodline. Andy's transformation was an accident, but he can still join this powerful group if he proves himself worthy. They take him to the cell where Chris is being held and order him to rip out his friend's heart. When Andy refuses, Claude warns him that his decision will cost him his own heart, but Andy stands his ground. Suddenly, Andy attacks Claude, relying on his newly enhanced reflexes to try to escape. However, he quickly discovers that everyone there is a werewolf too, leaving him completely surrounded. Then Andy hears Seraphine calling his name. She bursts through the door behind him, and the two escape together. As they run, Seraphine pours gasoline along the path. When they reach a secret passage, she throws a torch onto the ground, setting the entire tunnel on fire before jumping into the water with Andy. The passage leads directly to the basement of her house. There, Seraphine shows him the man lying behind the curtain. His name is Terry, and he is a scientist as well as her stepfather. Not long ago, he was close to discovering a cure for the family's condition, but the first test failed, causing Seraphine to transform into a werewolf. She attacked her mother and then went after Terry, who was unable to escape through the sewers. When Seraphine regained consciousness, she was overwhelmed by guilt. She climbed to the top of a tower intending to throw herself off, and that was where she met Andy. It isn't long before the werewolf gang arrives to make sure the fugitives are not hiding there. Andy escapes upstairs while Seraphine tries to hold Claude back, but the rest of the gang quickly chases after her. Things get even worse when Amy appears again. She is still extremely angry, so she tries to help the werewolves hunt Andy and points toward the place where he is hiding. Luckily, Amy doesn't even know how to whistle, and her body ends up falling down. The gang doesn't spot Andy until he manages to steal a car. However, he crashes, causing several cars to slam into each other violently and angering several drivers. Now Andy is being hunted by two different groups. He grabs onto the back of a bus to make his way back to the basement, where he finds Sarah Finn devastated, desperately trying to wake her stepfather after the gang destroyed the laboratory. Things get even worse when Andy discovers that the gang also stole the substance that causes an instant transformation, leaving behind nothing but a flyer for the next party. Andy knows it's another trap, so he sneaks into the crowd, shuts off the music, and warns everyone that they're in danger. But Locke is also at the party, and Andy is quickly arrested while the crowd applauds, refusing to believe any of his warnings. Sarah Finn is outside and realizes that the security guard has blocked the exit. At the same time, the police discover that everyone is trapped inside. Just as the show begins, Claude and his gang step onto the stage dressed as monks and reveal Chris tied to a cross. Faced with this horrifying sight, Andy grabs an officer's gun and opens fire on the gang, but he is quickly restrained. Locke orders everyone to be arrested, while the fake monks inject themselves with the substance that triggers the transformation. But the handcuffs are useless once the monsters reveal their true forms and begin attacking everyone indiscriminately. In the chaos, the cross eventually collapses, sending Chris crashing to the ground. Meanwhile, Sarah Finn manages to free herself from the security guard and smashes through the door with a bulldozer. Several police cars arrive in response to the call for backup, along with the female prosecutor herself. This scene is incredibly strange. The location is an abandoned church, while Chris is still tied to the cross and desperately runs for his life as best he can. The prosecutor becomes furious at what she considers police superstition and orders everyone to go inside immediately. Andy grabs another gun and shoots one of the werewolves. He then warns Sarah Finn that Claude has escaped. Several members of the gang are killed, and they discover that one of them is the werewolf who killed Brad. Brad finally breaks free from his physical trap, while Andy and Sarah Finn head down into the underground chambers and take separate paths. Locke, meanwhile, runs into a werewolf. Terrified, he runs away and falls through a secret passage. The female prosecutor isn't as lucky. A werewolf devours her and her assistant. Their screams catch Sarah Finn's attention, so she goes after one of the werewolves and kills it, only to realize at the worst possible moment that she has run out of ammunition. With no chance of defeating the creature in her human form, she runs. At that exact moment, she comes across a fallen monk who still has a syringe. Sarah Finn decides to use it, and transforms into a werewolf herself, allowing her to face the other werewolf on equal terms. Andy doesn't know what has happened. When he arrives armed, he shoots both of them. The other werewolf dies instantly, while Sarah Finn returns to her human form. Andy is horrified when he realizes what he has done. Sarah Finn tells him that there is no other chance, and asks him to at least eat her heart. She reminds him that she will finally be free if he eats it. Just then, the police arrive, so Andy leaves them to deal with Sarah Finn, knowing that Claude is the only one left to completely wipe out the gang. While searching for his enemy, Andy slips and falls onto the subway tracks. At that exact moment, a speeding train appears. When he sees Claude heading toward him as well, Andy jumps away at the last possible second. The train hits the werewolf, terrifying the passengers. The driver looks down at the tracks through the window but is suddenly attacked. The creature then bursts into the next train car, sending everyone into a panic. Soon, the effects of the drug wear off, and Claude returns to his human form. He begins preparing another syringe, but when Andy reaches him through the window, he kicks the syringe away. The two engage in a brutal fight. During the struggle, Andy notices a mark on Claude's shoulder, the same mark Andy himself left on the night he was bitten. That's when he realizes that Sarah Finn wasn't the one who bit him. Andy tries to reach the syringe, but Claude eventually manages to stab him. He then attempts to escape after realizing the magnitude of his mistake, but he doesn't get far. Andy transforms into a werewolf, throws Claude to the ground, and tears out and devours his heart from behind. Several months pass, and Andy and Sarah Finn are about to get married. During the wedding ceremony, Chris drops the ring, and the two of them jump to catch it. We then see them at the Statue of Liberty, where Andy places the ring on Sarah Finn's finger while the two are still in midair. And that's how the movie ends. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, your opinion matters to us, so be sure to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel.